A student concluded her work shift and mysteriously disappeared during a phone conversation with her boyfriend, prompting the police to initiate a swift search. They meticulously reviewed hours of surveillance footage in hopes of uncovering any leads. Soon, they stumbled upon something profoundly unsettling, yet the young woman's fate remained unresolved for several months. Ultimately, investigators revealed the truth, but the case's resolution incited widespread outrage and disbelief. Drew Shadin was born on September 26, 1981, in the quaint town of Pequot Lakes, Minnesota. From a young age, Drew exhibited boundless energy and determination. She had a passion for drawing, crafting, and staying active through basketball, volleyball, and golf. Additionally, she participated in various charitable initiatives, always seeking opportunities to assist those in need. Her warm personality and genuine kindness endeared her to many, and she was even elected prom queen during her high school years. After graduating, Drew enrolled at the University of North Dakota, majoring in fine arts. Despite the campus being a 3-hour drive from her hometown, she made it a priority to visit her parents frequently. Drew skillfully balanced her academic pursuits, where she excelled, with 2 part-time jobs and an active involvement in campus activities. She continued her commitment to charity, never losing sight of her core values. Furthermore, Drew enrolled in a special university program that allowed her to travel regularly, and she was particularly enthusiastic about an upcoming trip to Australia. During her college years, she began a serious relationship with a young man named Chris, and the couple started making significant plans for their future together. On November 22, 2003, 22-year-old Drew commenced her typical weekend shift at a clothing store where she was employed part-time. Later that evening, she was scheduled to work as a waitress at a local club. After completing her first shift, Drew visited a shop in the same mall, purchased a purse, and proceeded toward the parking lot. During her walk, she called her boyfriend, Chris, and they engaged in a conversation lasting approximately 4 minutes. Suddenly, an unusual occurrence interrupted their discussion. Drew fell silent. After a brief pause, she exclaimed, "Oh my God," and then the call disconnected. Initially, Chris did not think much of this interruption, assuming that the call had dropped as Drew walked through the parking lot or that her phone battery had died. 3 hours later, Chris received another call from Drew's phone, but upon answering, he was met with silence. He could faintly hear background noises that resembled wind, along with what sounded like phone buttons being pressed. He called out Drew's name multiple times, but there was no reply. Concerned, Chris attempted to return the call, but Drew did not answer. Growing increasingly anxious, he decided to contact her roommate to inquire if she had heard from Drew. The roommate informed him that she had not spoken to Drew all day but reassured him that she was likely busy with work and that there was no cause for alarm. However, shortly after their conversation, Drew's roommate received a call from the manager of the club where Drew was expected to work that evening. To her astonishment, the manager informed her that Drew had not arrived for her shift and had not called to notify anyone, which was entirely out of character for her. Drew was known for her responsibility and reliability, which made her roommate increasingly anxious when she recalled the peculiar phone call Chris had mentioned. Fearing that something might have gone awry, she began contacting local hospitals, hoping to find Drew admitted somewhere, but no one fitting her description had been reported. As evening fell, the roommate resolved to alert the police, detailing how Drew had missed her shift, failed to return home, and had received unsettling calls from her boyfriend. However, the police did not perceive an immediate threat. They believed there was insufficient evidence to indicate a serious issue, considering Drew was only 22 years old. They advised her to wait a bit longer before taking further steps. Nevertheless, the roommate took the initiative to reach out to the campus police at the University of North Dakota. Unlike the city police, the campus officers acted promptly, beginning their investigation at the mall where Drew had worked that day, the last known location where she had been seen. Upon inspecting the parking lot, they discovered her car parked in its usual spot, despite her shift having ended hours earlier. Another troubling detail was that the car doors were unlocked. Although there were no signs of a struggle inside the vehicle, the officers soon spotted something concerning on the ground nearby, a small knife sheath. This alarming find prompted the university police to notify the city police, who then became involved in the investigation. Officers requested access to CCTV footage. Investigators reviewed footage from the parking lot in hopes of finding a lead. However, they encountered a significant issue. Drew's vehicle was situated in a blind spot, completely outside the range of the cameras. Determined to uncover the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, they turned to the mall's security footage. They meticulously examined hours of video from every camera within the premises, attempting to trace Drew's movements prior to her vanishing. This task proved to be quite challenging due to the mall's expansive layout, making the process lengthy and arduous. Simultaneously, news of Drew's disappearance rapidly circulated throughout the campus, prompting the university to swiftly organize an extensive search operation. Hundreds of students volunteered to assist, combing through streets, wooded trails, riverbanks, and other isolated areas. Faculty members also encouraged anyone with pertinent information to come forward, hoping to uncover a clue that might illuminate the situation surrounding Drew's disappearance. In parallel, the police obtained Drew's phone records, which corroborated her boyfriend's account of their last conversation. However, upon investigating the phone's location data, they discovered an anomaly. The cell tower pings indicated that Drew's final call to Chris had not originated from the mall parking lot, but rather from a nearby town approximately a 30-minute drive away. Analyzing the timeline, investigators concluded that the sounds Chris heard during the call, such as wind and button presses, could have occurred while Drew was already in this different location. Given that her car remained parked at the mall, it became evident that Drew could not have reached the other town independently, leading the police to suspect the possibility of abduction. Significant efforts were made over the next few days, yet no new leads emerged. Officers continued to meticulously review the mall's surveillance footage, while search teams scoured the city, fervently hoping to uncover even the slightest clue. 2 days later, the investigation took a pivotal turn in a small town named Crookston, located near the area where Drew's phone last transmitted a signal. Police discovered a black shoe by the riverbank, and upon showing it to Drew's roommate, she instantly recognized it as belonging to Drew. This finding intensified investigators' concerns. If Drew had indeed been abducted, the evidence indicated she had been taken far from her hometown. The police promptly reached out to neighboring departments, sharing case details and soliciting assistance in the search. Meanwhile, investigators successfully located CCTV footage from the mall that depicted Drew on the day of her disappearance. The footage revealed her visiting several stores after her shift, seemingly shopping for Christmas gifts for her family and friends. This evidence provided investigators with a clear understanding of Drew's attire at the time of her vanishing, confirming that she was wearing the same black shoes as the one found near the river in the adjacent town. With all available clips featuring Drew in hand, investigators began scrutinizing the footage for any suspicious individuals who may have been following her or appeared in multiple frames alongside her. Soon, a middle-aged man dressed entirely in black, walking with a cane, drew their attention due to his peculiar behavior. According to the CCTV footage, the man entered the grocery store connected to the mall. The individual frequented the mall on numerous occasions, yet he never made any purchases. Instead, he seemed to disregard the merchandise entirely, concentrating instead on other shoppers, particularly women. Investigators soon identified the same man in additional footage captured outside the store, where he was observed sitting on a bench, watching those who passed by. A particularly alarming incident occurred when a young woman, who bore a slight resemblance to Drew, walked by him. He then rose from the bench and began to follow her. Over the subsequent hours, the police discovered more recordings that depicted the same man trailing other young women throughout the mall. Unfortunately, the footage alone did not provide sufficient information to identify him. Consequently, detectives consulted their database, examining records of local men with prior serious criminal convictions. After compiling a list of 60 names, they narrowed it down to 4, eliminating anyone who did not fit the suspect's description. Among the remaining candidates, they identified one man who closely resembled the figure seen in the mall footage, 50-year-old Alonso Rodriguez. Rodriguez had a significant criminal background and a troubled history. He had faced severe health challenges since childhood, which made both schooling and social interactions, particularly with women, exceedingly difficult. For instance, one of his legs was shorter than the other, necessitating the use of a cane for mobility. Eventually, Alfonso turned to drugs, and at the age of 21, he encountered the law for the first time when he attempted to assault a woman who had kindly offered him a ride home. Once inside her vehicle, he brandished a knife and tried to attack her, but the victim successfully managed to escape. Alfonso fought off an attack shortly after he assaulted 2 additional women in the same month. He was sentenced to 5 years of mandatory therapy. He was subsequently released back into the community that same year. However, Alfonso was arrested again, this time on suspicion of assault, but the prosecution was unable to gather sufficient evidence for a conviction. Shortly thereafter, he attempted to abduct another woman, during which he stabbed her. This time, he was apprehended and convicted, receiving a sentence of 23 years in prison. He was released on May 1, 2003, just 7 months prior to Drew's disappearance. Compounding the situation, he was placed under the supervision of his relatives, who themselves questioned his readiness to reintegrate into society. Following his release, Alfonso moved in with his mother in Crookston, the very town where Drew's shoe had been found. Given these circumstances, detectives were nearly certain of Alfonso's connection to Drew's disappearance. On the 4th day of the investigation, he was brought in for questioning. Alfonso acknowledged that he had been at the mall but maintained that he had no involvement in the abduction, claiming he was there to watch a movie at the theater. He even specified a particular film. However, when investigators verified his account, they found that the movie was not showing at that theater or anywhere else in the town. Upon realizing that Alfonso had fabricated his story, the police requested to search his vehicle, to which he surprisingly consented without a warrant. Inside, they discovered a receipt indicating that he had purchased a pocket knife. When detectives examined the model of the knife, they found it matched the sheath that had been located. The knife found near Drew's vehicle was an exact match, yet this was not the most concerning discovery. The knife itself was also located in Alonso's car, submerged in a container filled with a cleaning solution. Forensic experts, upon examining Alonso's vehicle, uncovered traces of blood that had been wiped away. They successfully extracted a DNA sample, which was subsequently compared to DNA obtained from Drew's toothbrush, resulting in a perfect match. Additionally, a woman's shoe and another knife, which had not been immersed in cleaning solution, were found in his car. Testing revealed blood traces on the blade, and DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Drew. By December 10th, with a substantial amount of evidence collected, Alonso was arrested and charged with kidnapping and suspected murder. However, despite the seemingly incriminating evidence against him, detectives remained uncertain about Drew's fate or her whereabouts. Alonso maintained his silence, refusing to confess, prompting the police to redirect their efforts towards locating Drew. They appealed to the public for assistance, enlisted additional volunteers, and concentrated their search efforts in Crookston and its neighboring areas. Unfortunately, despite their diligent efforts, months passed without any leads. The heavy snowfall that winter further complicated matters, hindering access to remote locations. By early March, 3 months after Drew's disappearance, preparations commenced for Alonso's trial, during which he pleaded not guilty before the judge. At this juncture, very few believed Drew was still alive, yet the prosecutors remained optimistic about securing a conviction based on the evidence at hand. Meanwhile, the police continued their search as spring approached and the snow began to melt. They were ultimately able to investigate areas that had previously been unreachable, such as forests, open fields, and bodies of water. This search persisted until April 17th, when investigators received the unfortunate yet anticipated news that Drew's body had been discovered a few miles west of Crookston, submerged in the local river. During the winter months, the region had been frozen and blanketed in snow, rendering it nearly impossible for search teams to locate her earlier. However, once the snow completely melted, her body was swiftly found. Medical examiners identified bruises, knife wounds, and signs of sexual assault on her remains. While they could not definitively determine the cause of death, the presence of stab wounds and indications of strangulation were noted, alongside the possibility that she succumbed to exposure after being left in that location. It was concluded that Drew likely died approximately 3 hours after her abduction. With the discovery of Drew's body, the prosecution faced the critical task of ensuring that the perpetrator was brought to justice. Since the abduction occurred in North Dakota and the murder took place in neighboring Minnesota, the case fell under federal jurisdiction. This meant that Alfonso could potentially face the death penalty, despite the fact that capital punishment was prohibited in both states. Nevertheless, the governor of Minnesota publicly expressed support for the possibility of a death sentence, although many residents of the state opposed it. In North Dakota, this case marked the first instance in over a century in which a resident faced the possibility of the death penalty. The trial commenced in the summer of 2006, with Alfonso continuing to assert his innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The evidence against him left little room for avoiding punishment, and on February 8, 2007, he was sentenced to death. As is frequently the case with capital punishment, the execution was postponed for several years. During this period, Alfonso remained incarcerated, awaiting his fate. Meanwhile, Drew's family became actively involved in advocating for legislation to establish a national registry of offenders convicted of violent crimes. In the summer of 2007, this law, named in Drew's honor, was enacted by the president, creating a website that allowed the public to access the addresses and other personal information of individuals convicted of violent offenses. Drew's parents consistently asserted that Alfonso should never have been released from prison initially. Additionally, the doctor responsible for his mandatory rehabilitation later expressed his concerns to reporters, stating that he had strongly opposed Alfonso's release and recommended transferring him from the clinic back to prison, as he believed Alfonso still posed a threat to society. Despite these warnings, Alfonso was permitted to return to the community, a decision that ultimately led to tragedy. Regrettably for Drew's family, the sentencing of Alfonso Rodriguez did not conclude the matter. In 2011, Rodriguez's attorneys filed an appeal, arguing that their clients suffered from developmental issues. Although this initial attempt was unsuccessful, a second appeal filed a decade later in 2021 proved to be much more effective. This time, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, acknowledging evidence that suggested Rodriguez did indeed have developmental challenges and noting that his attorneys had not been afforded a fair opportunity to present their case. During the initial trial, the judge emphasized Rodriguez's difficult upbringing and serious health issues. The defense team contended that the medical examiner's testimony regarding Drew's injuries was exaggerated, implying that the reality was not as dire as portrayed. This series of events ultimately resulted in the case being reopened, compelling Drew's family to once again seek justice. Ultimately, the judge annulled Rodriguez's death sentence and mandated a new trial. Consequently, in March 2023, Alfonso received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It is particularly troubling that Rodriguez had previously confessed to the crime in a 2013 interview conducted from death row. However, he will now spend the remainder of his life incarcerated, no longer facing execution. In memory of Drew, her university established an ongoing scholarship, and her family has created a memorial garden in her hometown, with plans to construct a similar memorial on her university campus.